I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window of my apartment in Boston, the kind that overlooks the Charles River and glows gold when the sun hits it just right. My silk blouse felt cool against my skin, still crisp from the dry cleaner. Below, people hurried through the morning air, while my phone buzzed on the marble counter behind me. I didn't look at it at first. I was reviewing the final schedule for tonight, a private dinner with 2 Nobel Laureates who wanted to collaborate on my latest research project. It still felt surreal sometimes, the way life had folded into itself, how the quiet girl who once cried in bathroom stalls during senior year now had a headline in last month's scientific journal. The phone buzzed again. I exhaled, walked toward it, and when I glanced at the screen, my breath caught for a moment.
Dad.
A name I hadn't seen pop up in over a year. A name that once made my stomach twist. A name tied to a sentence I could never forget. No one's coming to your graduation party, Ava. Don't get your hopes up. My fingers hovered over the screen. It was almost funny, in that sharp, ironic way pain sometimes becomes. On the very day I was preparing to dine with some of the world's greatest minds, the man who convinced me I'd celebrate alone suddenly wanted to talk. I swallowed, steadying myself. Some truths never really fade. They just wait. I was 17 the day everything cracked open. Our house in Ohio always smelled faintly of motor oil and burnt toast, my dad's workshop and his terrible habit of forgetting things in the toaster. I remember standing in the kitchen doorway, holding a stack of freshly printed graduation invitations. My hands were trembling a little, but I told myself it was excitement. Dad, I said softly, can you look at these? I designed them myself. He didn't even glance up from the engine parts he had spread across the dining table. A socket wrench clinked against metal. What now, Ava? I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. I just wanted to show you the invitations. I thought maybe we could finally, plan the party together. He gave a slow sigh, the kind laced with disappointment. Ava, no one's coming to your graduation party. My throat tightened instantly.
What?
Why would you say that? He wiped his hands on a rag, still not meeting my eyes. You barely talk to anyone. You're always buried in books. Who exactly do you think is going to show up? The Nobel Prize Committee. He laughed under his breath, as if the joke wasn't cruel. The words burned worse than the sarcasm. Not because I expected a crowd, but because he didn't even try to believe in me. I felt the sting rise behind my eyes, but I refused to cry in front of him. I invited people, I whispered. He shrugged. Save yourself the embarrassment. Cancel it. I walked out before he could say more. The paper invitations crumpled slightly in my fist, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Outside, the evening air was cool, brushing against my cheeks like it was trying to comfort me. I drove straight to my grandmother's house. Nana Grace opened the door before I even knocked twice. Sweetheart? What happened? The moment she pulled me into her soft lavender-scented hug, I broke. The tears, the anger, the humiliation, it all spilled out. She listened without interrupting once. Then she reached into her dresser and handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny compass charm. This belonged to your mother, she said, clasping it around my neck. A compass only works if you move forward, Ava. Don't let anyone, not even your father, convince you to stand still. Something in me clicked then. A quiet, determined place I didn't know I had. That night, I canceled nothing. Instead, I sent out the invitations with a shaky kind of courage. And I made myself a silent promise. One day, people would show up. The right people. 3 months after graduation, I packed my entire life into 2 suitcases and a cardboard box labeled Fragile Dreams. I moved to Boston on a scholarship so thin it felt like it might tear with one wrong step, but it was enough. Enough to start. Enough to breathe somewhere new. I wasn't brave. I was desperate. My first week on campus, I remember sitting alone in the back row of a seminar hall, running my fingers over the tiny compass around my neck. I had no friends, barely any money, and absolutely no idea how to survive the next 4 years. Then, Dr. Eleanor Brooks walked in. She was the kind of woman who made people straighten their backs just by entering the room, silver streaks in her hair, sharp glasses, and an aura of "don't waste my time." She placed her leather bag on the table, looked around, and her gaze landed on me for a moment longer than everyone else. "Miss Reynolds," she said, reading off the roster, "I've heard interesting things about your high school research project." I blinked. "You have?" She nodded once, firmly. "If you're willing to work hard, I'd like to mentor you." It felt like oxygen flooding my lungs. Working with Dr. Brooks was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. She pushed me harder than anyone ever had, late nights in the lab, rewriting proposals until my eyes burned, learning to speak up even when my voice shook. There were nights I cried in the bathroom stall because an experiment failed. Nights I fell asleep at my desk with my hair tied back and my laptop still open. Mornings my hands shook from too much coffee and too little sleep. But there were victories, too. My first published paper, a tiny piece in an academic journal, but it felt like a firework in my chest. My first research grant, small but mine. My first conference invitation, unpaid, but with my name printed on the program. I didn't tell my dad any of it. He still thought I was the girl who wouldn't have anyone at her graduation party. And maybe some small part of me wanted to prove, silently, that he was wrong. So I kept my wins to myself. My social media stayed simple, photos of campus lawns, coffee cups, library corners. Never the lab, never the breakthroughs, never the awards I kept tucked inside my desk drawer. Some secrets deserve to bloom in private. By 21, I had joined a research team working on atmospheric microparticle modeling, the kind of project so obscure most people couldn't even pronounce it. But the scientific world knew. And those who knew were watching. One afternoon, Dr. Brooks walked into the lab with 2 printed emails in her hand. She placed them in front of me. "These," she said, "are invitations." I picked up the first one and froze. A symposium hosted by 2 Nobel Laureates, and they wanted me to present. "Me?" I whispered. Dr. Brooks gave me that rare half-smile she reserved for moments that mattered. "You've earned it, Ava. Now go show them why." I remember clutching the compass around my neck that night, whispering a thank you to my mother, to my grandmother, to the girl I used to be. Not a single person from home knew where I was going. But I knew. I was stepping into a world where people didn't just show up, they celebrated me. The day everything unraveled and then rebuilt itself started with a knock on the glass door of my research institute office. A sharp, hesitant knock. The kind that doesn't belong to someone confident or welcome. I was reviewing a set of climate model projections for an upcoming panel when I heard it. I looked up, and my heart stuttered. Standing on the other side of the door, awkward and out of place in his faded jacket, was my dad. For a second, I wondered if I was imagining him. My father never visited Boston. He never even asked for the address. But there he was. I stood up slowly, smoothing my blouse, feeling the familiar weight of my mother's compass necklace against my collarbone. A deep breath steadied me as I opened the door. "Ava," he said, hands stuffed in his pockets. "You'll look different." "I grew up," I replied, keeping my voice even. He cleared his throat. "I was in town. Thought I'd drop by." My eyes flicked toward the window. A rental car sat outside, with 2 familiar silhouettes inside, my Aunt Marianne and my cousin Joel. So this was a family visit. Of course they expected to see me struggling. Of course they assumed I was probably living paycheck to paycheck, clinging to a scholarship. I stepped back and motioned for him to enter. "Come in." When he walked inside, his eyes widened. Every wall in my office held a piece of my journey. Framed articles featuring my research. Photographs of me at symposiums. Congratulatory plaques from international conferences. A letter signed by 2 Nobel Laureates thanking me for my contributions. Credentials from MIT, Harvard collaborations, and international summits. He looked like he'd stepped into the wrong universe. Aunt Marianne and Joel walked in behind him, and the reaction was instant. "What is all this?" Marianne breathed, staring at a gold-embossed certificate. Joel lifted a photo of me standing beside 2 Nobel Prize winners. "Ava, this is photoshopped, right?" "No," I said calmly. "It's real." Dad swallowed hard. You work here? I don't just work here, I replied. I walked behind my desk, rested my hands lightly on the polished surface, and let the moment breathe. I lead a division. My research is internationally recognized. And the people in those pictures? I pointed to the Nobel Laureates. They celebrated my graduation with me. Literally. The silence was electric. I could almost hear their assumptions shatter one by one. But you never told us, Dad said, his voice cracking. You never asked, I replied softly. He looked down at his shoes, shame pulling at his shoulders. I thought you were barely making it. I said, at first. But I wasn't alone.
People believed in me.
People showed up, even when you told me no one would. Aunt Marian touched the edge of my desk, amazed. Ava, this office looks like something out of a magazine. I smiled faintly. It's just an office. The work matters more. Joel shook his head in disbelief. You're like some kind of scientist celebrity. I didn't laugh. It wasn't funny. It was the truth behind years of silence. Dad finally lifted his gaze, eyes glossy. Ava, I'm sorry. Those words, they were heavier than anger, heavier than the past. I let them settle, let them breathe, because this time, I controlled the silence. I stepped toward him slowly, stopping just a few feet away. I built this life quietly, I said, because I needed to know I was doing it for me, not for approval, not for praise, and definitely not to change your mind. He nodded, wiping the corner of his eye. I was wrong, Ava, about everything. I took another breath, the kind that fills your lungs with a lifetime of unsaid things. I know, I said. Now, let's talk about what happens next. I walked back behind my desk, not to create distance, but to create clarity. There is a difference. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the trembling girl holding crumpled invitations. I wasn't the daughter waiting for approval. I was a woman who had built something real, something undeniable. Dad stood there, stiff and uncertain, while Aunt Marianne and Joel watched like they were afraid to breathe too loudly. I folded my hands together. Before we move forward, I said, there have to be conditions. Dad blinked. Conditions? Yes, I said gently but firmly. I'm willing to have a family again, but not the version of family we used to have. The air in the room tightened, not with hostility, but with the weight of a new truth forming. I started with my father. Condition 1, I said. You stop dismissing my dreams. Not just mine, anyone's. You don't get to decide what's possible anymore. He swallowed. Ava, I'm not done, I said, my voice soft but unshakable. Condition 2, you show up. Not just when you're curious. Not when you're bored. And not when guilt drives you. Show up because you want to be better. He nodded slowly, shame flickering across his expression. I can try. I don't need try, Dad, I said. I need effort. Real effort. His eyes glistened. I turned to Aunt Marian next. You always compared me to everyone else, I said. You made me feel like I was strange for wanting more. So here's your condition. No more comparisons. Not between me and cousins. Not between me and kids these days. Not between me and the girl you thought I was. Aunt Marianne pressed a hand to her chest. Ava, I didn't realize. You didn't want to realize, I said gently. But now you can. Then I looked at Joel, who was fidgeting with the sleeves of his hoodie. And you, I said with a small smile, have one simple condition. He blinked. What's that? You chase your own dreams. Not the ones your mom hands you, not the ones you think are easier, not the ones that make you blend in. He looked stunned. I don't even know what my dreams are. That's the point, I said. Figure them out. You're allowed to want something big, Joel. Don't shrink yourself the way I did for years. He nodded, eyes shining with a mixture of relief and fear. Then I turned back to my father, the man who unintentionally forged the hardest parts of me. And one more thing, I said. Maybe the most important. He straightened slightly. Yes. No more pretending that I became who I am despite everything. I became this woman because I fought for her. Alone. You don't get to rewrite that. His voice cracked when he spoke. Ava, I know I failed you. I'm not looking for perfect, I said softly. I'm looking for growth. For a long moment, no one spoke. I could feel something shifting, like a tight knot loosening in the center of my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. The beginning of something better. Dad wiped his eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. I believed him. Not blindly. Not instantly. But genuinely. And that was enough for the first step. For weeks after that day, my father called every Sunday evening. Sometimes the conversations were awkward, heavy with the weight of all the years we skipped. But he stayed consistent. He asked real questions, not the polite, distant ones, but the kind that reveal someone trying. How was the conference, Ava? Are you eating well? Do you need anything for your next project? It wasn't perfect, but it was effort. Slow, steady, human. Aunt Marian sent me a handwritten apology letter, her first in her entire life, saying she finally understood that dreams weren't meant to be measured, only nurtured. And Joel called me one night from a bus station to tell me he'd applied to an art program, his voice shaking with fear and hope at the same time. And me? I kept working, kept building, kept growing into the woman I once prayed I could become. But with every breakthrough, every conference, every award, I found myself touching the compass pendant around my neck. The tiny charm had dulled over the years, but it was still solid, still pointing forward. One evening, as I prepared for another research gala, I held the compass in my palm and finally allowed myself to think of my mother. I wondered what she would think if she could see me standing in front of rooms that once terrified me, speaking with confidence, shaking hands with global leaders, laughing with Nobel Laureates who treated me like an equal. I whispered softly, I kept moving, Mom. Tears pricked behind my eyes, but they were warm this time, not heavy. Later that night, as I stepped out into the cool Boston air, my phone buzzed. A text from Dad. Proud of you today. Truly. I smiled. A small, unexpected, peaceful smile. Because life had finally come full circle. The girl who once stood alone holding crumpled invitations had become a woman whose smallest gatherings included some of the world's greatest minds. The girl who was told no one would show up had found herself celebrated on global stages. And the girl who once believed she had to earn love learned, finally, that she could demand respect instead. I touched the compass necklace again, letting it rest above my heart. Some journeys break you. Some rebuild you. Mine did both. But as I walked forward into the glow of the evening lights, I realized something with a clarity I'd never had before. I wasn't following the compass anymore. I had become it.